So as I covered in the earlier video, Shopify recently released a new theme called Horizon as part of the summer 2025 edition, the main highlights of which were the new capabilities within the online store editor, including, most importantly, theme blocks. But what about the Horizon theme itself? When sharing the Shopify Summer Editions update with my online community at Shopify Theme Development.com, I received a reply from one of my members highlighting some of the interesting technical aspects of the theme code itself, and I realized I needed to do a deep dive into the Horizon theme for myself. So let's take a look. All right, guys, so as you can see here, I've got the code for Horizon 1.0.1, which is the current version of Horizon at the time of recording, here inside Visual Studio on my local computer. I've also got a few other VS Code windows open. I've got the Dawn theme here, version 12, so we can compare the two themes when we need to. And I've also created a new project here just to demonstrate some of the features that the new Horizon theme has. Basically, I used ChatGPT to generate this base level project. It's very simple. I'm running it over here using live server within VS Code. And if I switch over, you can see it's very simple. I just go over here to collection. We've got a collection with a single product in it, and there's a single product. Something super simple just so I can demonstrate some of the things that I find in Horizon in a more simple form rather than looking at the Horizon code, which can be pretty complex. So let's start at the top. Let's start at theme.liquid. So if I go over to Horizon and I go into my layout folder here and go into theme.liquid, you'll see that this file is cleaner than Dawn. So it's only 67 lines long. If we go over to Dawn, for example, and look at the theme.liquid file, you can see here that it's 352 lines long. So this is a much more cleaner theme.liquid file. As you can see at the top, we've got a reference to a single CSS file. We'll take a look at that in a little bit. And then what you'll notice is a lot of the stuff that would have gone in theme.liquid is still here, but it's just stored in snippets. So if I look up, so if I copy that, look up meta tags.liquid, you can see all the meta tags are right here. They're just being inserted into the theme.liquid via a snippet. This includes the scripts. So if I look over here, you can see how the scripts are loaded, and you can see here an import map. This is the first thing I want to draw your attention to because this wasn't the case in previous versions of Shopify themes. If I try and find this in Dawn, for instance, it is not used. So to explain this a little bit, if we look in each of these sort of files and we have a look at the code within them, you can see there's a lot of imports and exports happening. So you can see here that we're importing a base level component and then we're using that to extend into a product title component. And if I scroll down, you can see that we're defining the custom element and then we're exporting the product title. So because we're exporting it, we can then import it over here in our imports. Okay, this is very similar to if you've worked on like a node project before, but in this case, it's native. Now, the use of web components is not new. This is something we talked a lot about in Dawn. And in fact, I made a course on it if you want to check that out. It's now a free module with any purchase of any JavaScript module on Shopify Theme Development.com, or you can access it on Skillshare.com still as well. But if we look at the JavaScript within Dawn, you can see web components are used a lot in Dawn. You should be familiar with them already if you've done some stuff with Dawn. If not, definitely get up to date with them because clearly they're not going away. They've made their way into Horizon as well. Okay, so to demonstrate this importing and exporting, I'm going to switch over to my Shopify Horizon features theme, and I'm going to switch over to this JavaScript branch I've created, where I have created this example component, super basic component. You can see it looks for a button within the component, adds an event listener to it, and then when the button is clicked, it just console logs button clicked. And I'm defining that web component so I can use it in my HTML, and then I'm exporting that web component. So if I go over to index.html, you can see that I've used an import map to import the example component using the path to the file. And then down here with the script type module, I'm importing that class from that file. Okay. Then down here, I have the web component. So if I switch over to the output here, you can see now I've got this box here. This is an example component. I'm going to have to open up my console log so we can actually see this. I'll turn that off. And then if I click me, there was a little bit of a delay, but there you go, button clicked. Okay. But if I didn't include this, so let's just comment that out and go over here and I click me, it doesn't work. And if we look at our sources, refreshing over here, you'll see that it doesn't actually load that file. So we've made a reference to where to import it from, but it's not going to import unless we actually say we want to import it or we include the path to the file in a src, which is what Shopify have done. So if we go back over to Horizon, you can see here that we've got these imports right here. But if we scroll down, as you can see, we're preloading these modules, and then we have these module script tags. So what's an example? We have product title. Actually, quick add, I believe, is an example. So if I search for quick add in this file, you can see that it's listed as an import, but then it's also brought in as a module in this scripts.liquid snippet regardless. Now, the thing that was peculiar to me was that some of these seem redundant. So if I go and look for something that imports at theme/quick add, you can see that it only has the reference to it. It doesn't actually have any other component or code that imports it. This is different to some of the other ones. So if I put this one in, it's actually the same thing, but some of them actually do have imports. Okay, so here you can see on other components, we're importing that component. But as you can see in the example of product title and quick add, for example, we're not actually importing them anywhere. So maybe I'm missing something here, but it feels kind of redundant. And if I was to actually go into the code for Horizon, let's have a look now. This is the unedited code, and I use the quick add function. You see I've already been playing around with this, so I've got some items in the cart already. Let me just clear those so it's more clear. And let me just add this to the cart. You can see that functionality works. And if I go and actually edit the theme code for Horizon, remove this import here for quick add, hit save. As you can see down here, we still got quick add if I search for it right here being brought in. So that shouldn't be a problem. And then let's refresh over here with that import being taken away. Click add, and then it still adds to the cart. So it seems a little redundant to have an import and then not use it anywhere. And then we can still have that code brought into our theme.liquid via this script tag. But if we go back to my own code for Shopify Horizon features and do the same thing, if I get rid of this import map, refresh over here, and I click me, it still works. So as you can see, it's doing the same thing as Horizon. With or without an import map, it's still importing the example component when I import it like this. And I can either do it like this, or I can do it like Shopify have done, where they have put in the src here, like that, and have no content within the script tags. That should also work. You can see it brings it in, and then I can click button, click. So given that this will work without an import map, I was a little confused, and I went to ChatGPT to ask why Shopify might be using an import map as well as bringing in the file. And ChatGPT came back to me saying that these import maps are for resolving imports elsewhere. Because of course, if we have in here this custom elements define method, and then we bring in that JavaScript anywhere, we're going to be able to use that custom web component. So given that this import map is actually not required to get this web component to run, I was a little confused as to why Shopify are doing this. So I consulted with my good friend ChatGPT, and as it says here in the summary, import map lets other modules import that component using a clean alias. But again, it does become redundant when we're not importing the module into any other file and we're not using the import alias anywhere else. So it would seem like Shopify have built in this import map not as something that's necessarily required for a lot of these files, but something that exposes these web components in order for other web components to extend from, as we see in the example of theme/dialog. You can see here, we're clearly importing classes from @theme/dialog, whereas right here, we're not importing anything from that. So it would seem that it is redundancies, but if you see something I don't see here, let me know. So that's all I wanted to say on the JavaScript of the theme. Like I said, it's using web components still, but now it's using more of this ES modules, import, export. And actually what it's doing is it's breaking up all the files into separate files, which I believe are more in the assets folder now than there were in Dawn. If we look at Dawn, we can see that there are a few JavaScript files, but just from first glance, it looks like Horizon has more of them. But the big difference you'll notice here between Dawn and Horizon is the CSS. As you can see here, there's all this component CSS. There are a ton of CSS files in the assets folder. If we look at Horizon, for instance, there's template-gift card, there's overflow-list, and there's base.css, but there are nowhere near as much CSS files as there was previously. So now let's have a look at how CSS is used in Horizon. So as we saw up here, we're bringing in the base CSS file, and I believe that's it. If we search for more references to .css, they don't exist. That's it. So base CSS is going to be our CSS that's loaded in to every page on our website. And then if we have a look at our Liquid code, so obviously templates are just JSON, but if we go into, let's have a look at a section first, moving our way down the theme structure. And let's have a look at search-header. Okay, no CSS here. But if we look at some others like product-recommendations, you can see that we're using the style sheet tag to bring in some styles. Okay, we're not using a reference to a component CSS file like we did in Dawn. So to make that very clear, if we go to Dawn, and let's just try and find component, right? So here you can see so many references to component CSS in all of the files. So like for footer, for example, we're bringing in all these different component CSS files that are external, and then still using style tags when necessary to insert dynamic content. But here you can see within Horizon, we're not using our style sheet tags just to bring in dynamic content. We're actually using it as an alternative to external CSS. Okay, so that's something interesting about how CSS is included in Horizon. In the snippets, you can see we're also doing the same thing. So all of the CSS besides basically the base.css has made its way into the actual Liquid files throughout the theme. Now, as Chester Chabahag has commented in the public channel of the Shopify Theme Developer community, he points to the use of nested CSS and container queries. Interesting. That's something new that we haven't seen in Dawn. So let's have a look at that now. Within Horizon, it can look pretty complicated to the uninitiated. So if I go into my base.css, first of all, you can see here that I've got a section here for view transitions. This is a new API that allows us to create transitions in the browser. So if we have a look at Horizon right here and we go between pages, you can see that there is some animation. It doesn't feel too fluid for me. Just feels like the main content section is sliding up, but maybe it works better on other computers. I don't know. But yeah, all of this code right here we'll get to in just a sec. But first I want to talk more about how the CSS is structured with the nesting and the container queries. So let me try and find some examples within the code right here. We're pretty high up here. Let me scroll down. Not sure if it's used in base. Okay, here we go. You can see here that we've got a CSS declaration nested within another CSS declaration. So if you've used Sass or SCSS before, you should be familiar with this syntax, but now it is native within CSS. And the second feature are container queries, which are like media queries, but they're based on the dimensions of a specific container. So if we search for @container across the theme, you can see multiple instances where Shopify are writing styles based on a container width rather than the screen width. Okay, and also we have this new syntax here where we don't have to write min or max width anymore. We can simply write width with an operator. Okay, so to make this a little simpler, I'm going to move out of the Horizon theme, move into my little demo here, discard that change, and then I'm going to switch over to nested CSS. Let's look at nested CSS first. Okay, so I'm going to go into styles.css, and as you can see here, actually there's an example right here that I missed, but you can see here that header is used twice. So instead of writing it out like this, what I can do is take the part after header and then paste it inside, and we're going to get the same result. Okay, so if I go back over to my code over here and inspect the H1, the A tag within the H1, you can see even Chrome DevTools have the nesting there. So you can see that there. If I put it back to what it was before, it's still going to work. And you can see that reflected here in the DevTools, but I can nest it and Chrome understands that and is applying the right styles. Okay, so that's the basic form of nesting. But if we're using a pseudo class, then we have to use the ampersand. So as you can see here for nav a hover. So beforehand, what we had was nav a, there we go, AI filling it out for me. We had that. And what that did was any time I hover over these menu items, they turn to black. But what we can do using the ampersand and nesting is we can nest this pseudo class within this CSS declaration. And then we use the ampersand to indicate nav A. Because if we didn't and we just did this, then we'd essentially be writing this, which isn't correct CSS. We actually need to put the ampersand here, and that tells the CSS to take away that space and essentially produce this equivalent CSS declaration. Okay, so like I said, if you've used Sass or CSS before, you should be quite familiar with this syntax. The next one is container queries. So I'm going to actually just discard that change, or actually I'll commit it. What was it? Nested H1A inside of header stage and commit. Okay, now I'm going to have a look at container queries with you guys. Okay, so container queries are a little bit more complicated, but I've put together a very basic example for you guys. Container queries, what they do is they apply styles based on the width of the container, not of the full viewport. So your first question might be, how does this container query know what element is the container? And the way we do that is by setting the container type on the element that we want to be the container. It's kind of like when we set position relative on an element in order to use position absolute to absolutely position an element within that relatively positioned element relative to the relatively positioned element. That was quite a mouthful. Anyways, now that I've written container type inline size, which basically means to look at the width on product detail, then I can write custom CSS based on the width of that container. And something to note here is that I can't target the container itself. I have to do something that's nested within it. Okay. And then also you'll notice that you might be used to the syntax where it's max width 623 like that. But this example right here is using the new syntax. So in this example, actually max width would be 631, or we could keep it 632 and put in greater than equals as the operator. But let's just leave it as is right here. And then now if I go into my product page, so I'll navigate over to here and we reduce the container size down. So right now, let's say inspect the element. And you can see that we are triggering that container. If we have a bigger screen size or a container size, you can see that that CSS does not apply. So it's a bit tight here. Maybe I'll put this down the bottom. So here you can see product detail is currently 1163 pixels wide. Let's bring it down to 632. So I might actually need to put this over to the side. And then let's bring it down. It's a little bit harder to see than the viewport width because Chrome shows you the viewport width up the top. But as you can see here, the image is now decreasing in size. If I click over to here, you can see that now the container is in effect, and I'm applying this style, which makes the image 50% width of the container. There's probably a range of other ways you can do this, and you can get by without using container queries, but they're a new feature and they have some benefits, and clearly Shopify have opted to use them. The next big thing before we move on to the smaller items is the view transitions. So if I go back to Horizon 1.0.1 and we look at, what was it before? It was in our base.css. We saw the view transitions. I won't spend too long on this because to talk about this properly would take more than an hour, but I'll show you a very simple example. To put it as simply as possible, what Shopify are doing here with view transitions is they've got it spread between this CSS file and then also a view transitions, which you may have noticed before. Actually, let me just find it here, view transitions.js. And you can see here that we've got 2 event listeners in here, okay? But this is a lot of code, lots going on here. I don't want to break down every single line because that would take an hour to do. Let me just show you a more basic example and then we'll come back to the Horizon example. Okay, so going into Shopify Horizon features, I'm going to go into view transitions branch. And if we scroll up, we can see here a bit more of a basic example. Okay, so I'll take these out to start with. And you can see here this media query at the top. What this does is prevents the view transition from applying for people that prefer reduced motion. So if they have it set to reduce, then we don't want to do this. But if they have no preference, then that's kind of permission for us to run the CSS transition. Okay. And now if we click between these different routes, we get this automatic crossfade transition. And what I want you to notice about this as well is over here under the HTML element, you can see that there is a pseudo element that pops up called view transition. Essentially how this works is when you navigate off to another page, a snapshot of your screen is taken, and then a snapshot of the next page is taken, and then there's just a crossfade between 2 snapshots. Okay, and then while this transition is happening, I should not be able to click on anything, as you can see here. So if I go back, it's hard to show when the transition's fast, but I should not be able to do any interactions on the page whilst the transition is happening. But we can turn that off with this code right here. Keep this one off for now. And then now I should be, if I'm quick enough, able to, that's tough, but can I highlight the product name while I'm doing that? Maybe if I put, it's a little bit tough. No, that's not going to work. Okay, my screen size is a little bit too small here, but let's try this. I'm not quick enough. But essentially this code, which we can also see in Shopify's code, prevents that view transition layer from blocking interactions on the page. Okay. Now, as we're clicking this, it's actually transitioning the whole page, but we can actually take the header out. I believe this is how we do it, and treat it differently. Okay. So again, I'm not going to go deep into how Shopify Horizon are using view transitions because it's pretty complicated. But to finish off this example, I'm going to have a look at the view transitions JavaScript. So I've got a very basic example here, but if we look at Shopify's example over here, you can see we've got the same thing. We've got 2 event listeners and then a custom function here, which just checks if the event has the view transition, because the view transition is an object on the event object. And in these 2 event listeners, we're looking for the page swap event, which happens when the page is changing, and the page reveal event, which happens on the other side when the new page appears. Okay. So if I go back to my basic example right here, all I'm doing is taking the view transition object off of the event object and then console logging that. Okay. So if I refresh over here, because I'm refreshing, the view transition object is null. But if I go from one page to another, you can see it flashes on the screen for a second as I'm starting to navigate to the next page, but then it disappears because I'm on a new page now. And now the view transition object of the new page on the page reveal event is now showing. Okay, so in order to get that other one to show up as well, I can click here to preserve log. And then if I go from one to the other, you can see the view transition from the previous page and the view transition from the next page. This one is coming from page swap, and this one is coming from page reveal. In between, there is a navigation from one page to another. Okay, so why is that important? Again, it's a little bit complicated, but essentially what Shopify are doing, adding transition types, and then within this CSS, they're applying styles and definitions based on which page is transitioning to the other page. There's a lot of moving parts to this, and I'm not going to go much deeper into it, but hopefully this basic example explains it a little. And now to finish off Horizon, let's breeze through some of the other things I noticed about this theme. If we take a look at the templates folder, we're not going to see anything particularly new here. It's all just JSON code. But what you will notice is that there is no customers folder within templates because the customers section is not coded in the theme anymore. That system is now called legacy customer accounts. So if I go over to Dawn, you can see this is not the case. If I go down to templates, you can see that the customers folder is there. We don't have that for Horizon because Shopify obviously wants to move us off of legacy customer accounts. The next thing I noticed was in one of these sections, let me find the example for you. Okay, right here you can see that we can define multiple specific block types on a section. So if you remember in my video about a year ago, this was one of my questions. Could we put in a comma-separated list of the accepted types? Well, I'm not sure if it worked back then to do it this way, but clearly it works now. You can actually specify multiple types if you don't just want to let it choose whichever from all theme blocks. But again, this feels a little bit redundant because how am I enabling all theme blocks to be added to a particular section and then specifying multiple different theme blocks here? If I actually take a look at this on the theme customizer, so I'll go over to here, customize theme. What section was it? Was it the product recommendations section? So I'll go down here. I believe that section will probably be in the product template, and there it is. And then if I go to add a block, you can see that I can add all blocks, not just the ones that have been specified via the type here. And if I was to go and delete, so let me go into product recommendations here, scroll down, and if I was to delete all of these specific references, apart from the private one, because the private one is not going to show up in @theme, and then I refresh over here, try to add a block, I get the same thing, access to all of the theme blocks, including text, and what were the other ones, icon, and all of that. So again, seems like a strange redundancy here that it's specifying specific theme blocks that exist within the global theme blocks while also having the type of @theme here, which tells the section that it can take any block from the blocks folder. The exception here, as I mentioned, is this one right here because this is a private block denoted by the underscore at the start. That one will need to be defined in order to use divider because it is a private block. It's not going to show up. And on the subject of block, we can see something called, I believe it's called static blocks. So we can do obviously content for blocks, which we'll see throughout the theme for bringing in whatever blocks that the merchant has specified in the online store editor. But there's also content for block, which specifies a very specific block. So we can see this throughout our code. And we should even see this in, I believe we saw an example in product recommendations. So as you can see here, we've got content for block product card. So it's going to bring in the product card block here, and it's inside a loop. So it's going to bring in one of these product card blocks for every product. This workflow might seem a little similar to snippets actually, but how it's manifesting in the actual theme editor is, as you can see here, I can't actually remove this recurring product card block. But what I can do is click inside and update the settings. But because I can't access the individual product card, this is a recurring thing. Any setting I set here is going to apply to the whole section. So essentially I could have put the settings up here on the recommended products section itself, but it's broken it up into this block. And so it puts the settings in a different part of the section nested within a block. You'll see that there's also ID and closest product. So throughout Horizon, Shopify seems to use content for block to essentially bring in the same thing as we would a snippet, but then also have it as a block in the online store editor and have settings for the merchant to update. And in fact, many of the blocks, if we look at them, the liquid code is just coming from a snippet. So if I'll find one in here, there should be a few examples. Yeah, for example, like this one, group, essentially just captures the content for blocks and passes it in as an argument to the group snippet, and then the schema to give it the input settings in the online store editor. To finish off this video, which is probably already pretty long, I'm just going to cover some strange things I found that I couldn't really figure out what was going on. So as you can see here, we've got section.liquid, right? This is the custom section. So if we go into over here, we can bring in a custom section. But we've also got this underscore blocks section within this sections folder. And strangely enough, it has the exact same name. So if we go down to the preset, it is also custom section, and it's also bringing in the section snippet. So if I go down here, you can see it's doing the same thing. Now, following the convention of blocks, the underscore at the start kind of indicates that this might be a private section, but private sections are not something that Shopify have talked about. So is there a template that actually uses this blocks? If we have a look, of course, we've got all these blocks array, but is there a reference to a section in a JSON schema for blocks? Okay, because that would make sense. If you make it a private section and then you can't bring it in using the theme editor, you can only write it into the JSON code, then that would kind of make sense. But right now, this section right here, it has the same name as custom section. And it seems like when I'm adding custom section here, I am in fact adding this file right here. So it's a mystery to me what this file actually does. If you know the answer, make sure to comment below. The other mystery, as I mentioned before, is the seemingly redundant combination of referencing @theme, which allows all theme blocks, and then specifying specific public theme blocks on top of that. If we're already specifying that we want to accept all theme blocks, then why do we need to specify on top of that which theme blocks? So I already covered that before, but here you can see an example that actually makes sense. You can see here that we're allowing all theme blocks, except private ones, of course, and then we're also on top of that allowing a private block that as a private block would not show up otherwise, okay? And this is the same code as if we went into section. So let's have a look at section here. So adding in this custom section, you can see I've got access to all of the public theme blocks, but I've also got access to that private block of divider. So that's something that seemed a bit peculiar to me. All right, so I'm going to end it there, guys. There's, of course, a ton more stuff we could cover. In fact, some stuff that's not even documented on Shopify's documentation. Maybe they'll update that in future. But there was a few areas where I found stuff that wasn't quite documented. Obviously, there's the whole topic of view transitions, how they've structured everything within the theme. We could spend hours talking about it. But I'm going to leave it there, guys. Obviously, there's a bit to look at within the Horizon theme. As Chester Chubahug mentioned in his comment, I think the main things to look at and draw inspiration from are the view transitions, the nested CSS, and the container queries. So basically, all the CSS. As I mentioned before, we've been using web components since Dawn, so this is not particularly new, although it was a big update from debut to Dawn, using web components. This time from Dawn to Horizon, the biggest stuff, I believe, is related to the CSS and the view transitions. And of course, the block functionality, which gives Shopify themes almost a whole new theme architecture. And on that subject, like I mentioned in the last video, the Shopify Liquid module at shopifythemedevelopment.com has been updated to reflect this. So if you do want to check out the module or you're already signed up, there is a new section now on blocks, introducing the 3 types of blocks and going a bit deeper into theme blocks and how to use them. But of course, it's always good to look at what Shopify are doing. So I'll let you continue to study Horizon in your own time if you so choose. And now let's wrap up the video. Okay, so thank you guys for watching, and thank you to Chester Chubahug within my online community for inspiring me to create this video. If you'd like to join the free community yourself at shopifythemedeveloper.com, simply head to the website and click Community to create an account today. And while you're there, you might as well check out some of the modules and sign up for a free mini course based on your current skill level within Shopify Theme Development. The links to all the resources are in the description of this video. Happy coding, and I'll catch you in the next one.